News!
Okay, we'll start with this. The continued fallout this past weekend's big fight, big win for Savannah Marshall opposite the ring, then undisputed champion Franchon Cruz. A Twitter user that goes by the name I Throw Games says, so she being Clarissa Shields, crashes her press conference for attention. She knew what she was doing. She wants the fight because she beat her before, and Sav wants the fight because she has titles and wants a paycheck. Tell Jadeja Green to petition immediately.
Petition the sanctioning bodies, the powers that be, to order the fight between her and Savannah.
Another Twitter user that goes by the name Mr. Jones says, I don't want to see Clarissa Shields beat up on Savannah again. Jadeja Green should be next for Marshall.
There's certainly a desire on the ground to see Jadeja Green share the ring with Savannah.
What is it about Jadeja Green that has everyone so interested? Well, could be that performance opposite the ring former unified champion Aline Cedar-Ruz, who she battered.
Great performance.
Sporting a professional record of 12 wins with no losses, no draws, and 11 knockouts.
She's a heavy hitter.
Mandatory challenger to at least 3 of the 4 major titles that Savannah has lifted from Franchon Cruz. The question now is, how does this fight differ from that one? What makes Jadeja Green different from Franchon Cruz? Well, with Franchon, a characteristic pressure fighter, mid-range to inside fighter, busy puncher.
It's a kind of fighter to where you can't afford to be economic, because if you are, she's going to outwork you and she's going to hurt you.
With Franchon Cruz, you might have to be a bit busier than you normally are in spots fighting her off.
Whereas with Jadeja Green, it is a little different. Jadeja Green, who saw action 3 times last year and has already seen action once in February this year.
With Franchon, you might have to be a bit busier than you normally are, because she's going to put you in a situation where you have to fight her off, where you have to respond, whereas with Jadeja, less is more.
Jadeja Green, who has the look of a boxer puncher, a spiteful one, a strong one.
She can fight coming forward, she can fight going backwards, her shot selection.
She's a sharp puncher.
Strong one, perhaps just as, if not stronger, than Savannah Marshall. So what does Savannah have to do with Jadeja to secure the W? And how does this fight differ from the one she just had?
Jadeja's not a pressure fighter. She's not just going to come rushing in,
lunging and leaning over her lead foot the same way that Franchon did. Franchon, who's always in a hurry to crowd her opponent, play them close to the chest.
That's not Jadeja's calling card. She's more coordinated, more refined.
Punches aren't as wide as a Franchon Cruz. These are shorter, sharper punches, sharper shots. You don't want to spend too much time in the pocket with Jadeja Green.
I think the biggest difference between fighting Franchon and fighting Jadeja for Savannah is that with Franchon, you have to open up a little more, throw punches a little more, fight her off, whereas with Jadeja, less is actually more.
Less is more.
Jadeja Green has the look of a boxer puncher, a counter puncher.
I want to pay attention to that she's a counter puncher and a talented one.
Strong one.
Though not as statuesque a fighter as Savannah Marshall, not as much wingspan as Savannah. That's something that Savannah can use to her advantage here by being economic, staying on the outside, and staying behind her jab, not stepping into it.
Within range of Jadeja, you will notice that Jadeja is a very sharp puncher.
Shorter arms than Savannah, but it's a trade-off, where shorter arms may lead to shorter and sharper shots. It's harder for a fighter with shorter arms to get within striking distance of a taller, longer fighter, so long as that taller, longer fighter knows how to use that height and use that length.
What you're talking about for Savannah is only 1 and 2 punches at a time, careful not to mix it up in the pocket.
As stated, you don't want to be there too long with a fighter that throws short, sharp punches. They can beat you to the punch there.
This is a fight that Savannah would have to fight from the outside, loose and limber, playing at the angles.
The way she usually does, swaying side to side like a metronome, not giving her opponent a clear shot at her head.
For a statuesque fighter, Savannah Marshall shows great movement, great upper body movement, great agility.
Great power.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Thanks for that, Uncle Ben. Opposite the ring, Jadeja Green, she would have to be a lot more reserved than she was in the Shields fight, even more reserved than she was this past weekend with Franchon Cruz, who makes you fight, puts you in a position where you have to, whereas Jadeja's approach is a lot more measured than Franchon's. That can be used against her by a fighter with the right ingredient, the right tools. Savannah has some of them, her height, her length, that she doesn't need to be right upon Jadeja Green to touch her with the jab from either the southpaw or orthodox stance.
It's a dangerous fight, but it's a winnable fight.
So long as Savannah Marshall can keep it a boxing match and not an all-out war, a brawl, a shootout. You don't want to find out.
You don't want to find out just how hard Jadeja Green can crack. The focus of the fight has to be offsetting her power.
Offsetting it, working around it, and effectively disarming it. Neutralizing the counterpuncher relies on limiting that counterpuncher's openings.
Limiting those openings by staying behind the jab, only throwing 1 and 2 punches at a time and taking a half step back.
A half step to create space and fire a hard counter on an advancing opponent. As stated, it's a dangerous fight, but it's a winnable fight.
I don't know if it'll be next, but if it is, I'm watching.
Men's super middleweight news per tweet from Michael Benson. Canelo Alvarez versus Jermall Charlo will reportedly be at a full 168 super middleweight limit. No catch weight.
That's fine.
Story is that Jermall's brother, reportedly decided in recent days that he could not properly be prepared for the Canelo Alvarez fight on September 30th due to his long period of inactivity and ongoing personal situation, hence why his twin brother Jermall decided to jump in. Jermall, who initially was supposed to be fighting Tim Tszyu, his mandatory challenger by way of the WBO.
My thoughts always were that fight wouldn't materialize. For one reason or another, I couldn't see that fight between Tim and Jermall happening.
And now it's not. As you can imagine, Canelo's usual critics, the usual suspects, they're unhappy about this.
The other day I made a post about it. The other day I stated, the same people that were happy with Errol Spence Jr. fighting a lightweight in Mikey Garcia are unhappy with Canelo fighting a junior middleweight in Jermall.
Hypocrites in a nutshell. Fat fucking hypocrites.
Big fat fucking hypocrites looking to justify Errol fighting a lightweight, but clutching at their pearls when Canelo fights a junior middle.
Twitter user that goes by the name Cut Western responded by saying the difference is Mikey called out Spence. Spence didn't call for Mikey.
Well, Jermall called out Canelo. Canelo didn't call for Jermall.
Jermall called him out, literally, just a little over a month ago. Was this guy living under a rock when it happened? Because it was all over the place.
He continued.
Mikey Garcia was only 1 weight class above Spence, while Canelo is now 2 or more weight classes above Charlo. Canelo literally picked Charlo when he could have chose Benavidez.
Errol Spence picked Mikey Garcia when he could have picked Terrence Crawford.
And that nonsense about there only being one division between Mikey and Errol, that's more nonsense because right before Mikey moved up to fight Errol, he took on Robert Easter at 135 pounds in what was a WBC IBF unification match. The following fight, he skips right past 140, jumps up 2 weight classes to take on Errol, like Jermall is jumping up 2 weight classes to take on Canelo, and nobody's forcing him to do it.
Why are people lying about this stuff?
Pretending that Mikey moved up from 140 to 147 when you can go to BoxRec and see he moved up from 135 past 140 all the way up to 147 for Spence. I mean, why are people being disingenuous about this? What's with all the mental gymnastics? And what it really is that
they're big fat fucking hypocrites. That's what it is. They were happy to celebrate Errol Spence Jr. taking on a lightweight, but when Canelo Alvarez does something similar, when he fights a fighter 2 divisions south of where he campaigns, he's the bad guy.
I haven't soon forgotten the plaudits Errol got after the Mikey Garcia fight, how he was able to outbox him.
Haymanites have short memories.
Or maybe they think we do, me and you, but I haven't soon forgotten.
The argument seems to be that Canelo Alvarez is picking on a smaller fighter than himself, but there's actually an image of Canelo Alvarez in between both of the Charlo brothers, and you tell me who's naturally bigger and naturally smaller.
Don't confuse the Charlo brothers regularly cutting more weight than Canelo with them being smaller than Canelo. Both these guys have actually bigger frames than Canelo Alvarez, more height and more length.
What is often associated with a smaller fighter moving up in weight to take on a bigger fighter is the tail of the tape and how they will have to overcome the bigger fighter's size. That's not necessarily the case here with Jermall. Jermall won't be at a height disadvantage. He's taller than Canelo. He won't be at a reach disadvantage because he has more reach than Canelo.
I mean, that's the one thing that's different about this fight and the Errol Spence Jr. versus Mikey Garcia fight, that Mikey was at a height disadvantage with Errol. He was at a reach disadvantage with Errol. Charlo doesn't have those disadvantages going into this Canelo fight.
Errol Spence Jr.'s fans were happy to celebrate him outpointing what was so
Canelo obviously the naturally smaller fighter, but is Jermell smaller than Canelo, or is it just that he cuts more weight than Canelo? Common practice in today's era of boxing, guys who could campaign as middleweights and super middleweights cut a lot of weight to make junior middleweight. Guys who could make super middleweight cut a bunch of weight to make middleweight. Guys who could campaign as light heavyweights cut a bunch of weight to make super middle. It would actually be easier for a fighter like David Benavidez to not cut all that weight and just campaign as a light heavyweight. Making light heavy would be easier for David than making super middle, but the fights wouldn't be.
It's the caveat.
Yeah, for David, a fighter like him, making light heavy would be easier than making super middle, but winning fights at light heavy, that's what would be harder.
That's what wouldn't be easier.
That's why they do it. Fighters like David Benavidez know that at light heavyweight, your size advantage, well, you won't have that much of a size advantage in those divisions, thus boiling down to super middle.
It's the sacrifice they make to stay safe.
Canelo Alvarez is a much shorter and stumpier fighter than, say, David Benavidez, Jermall Charlo, or Jermell Charlo, but he's already campaigned well above junior middleweight, at middleweight, super middleweight, and at light heavyweight against two reigning champions, so you'll excuse me for saying that Jermell...
You want me to believe that Jermell is in fact the naturally smaller fighter
He's tiny.
than Canelo Alvarez because he campaigns at a lower weight than Canelo, when all that tells me is you just cut more weight than Canelo. Your frame, your physical dimensions, they say otherwise.
Now, I won't fault Jermell Charlo himself because he's not the one complaining. He signed up for this. It's Canelo Alvarez's critics, the usual suspects and the boo birds that are making Jermell to be...
They're making him out to be Tiny Tim. They're making him out to be a victim of some kind. When he signed up for this, he volunteered.
Kinda like how Mikey Garcia volunteered to fight Errol Spence Jr. And Errol chose to fight him, even though Terrence Crawford was right there.
You guys were okay with that, but you're clutching your pearls over this?
You guys were okay with Errol Spence Jr. delaying the Crawford fight by 4 years so he could fight a guy like Mikey Garcia.
4 or 5 years.
Now you're saying that Canelo shouldn't be fighting Jermell because David's right there? I was saying that Errol shouldn't be fighting Mikey because Terrence is right there. What's good for the goose is good for the gander.
You can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen if you don't like the banter.
You fucking hypocrites. Nobody likes a taste of their own medicine, but that's what these guys are getting.
Boo-hoo, bitch.
Cockamamie arguments these mongoloids are making in this brazen hypocrisy. Do you actually think you're convincing anyone with these arguments?
That stupid shit to yourself.
But he's listening to a word you say. Finally, south of super middle at super lightweight in Puerto Rico, Teofimo Lopez receives his new WBO title, the one he claims to have vacated, but he has accepted in La Isla Bonita.
Bobby Bonilla.
So is the guy retired or is he not retired? Because if he's accepting the WBO title, he couldn't have vacated it.
Who knows?
Thanks to the WBO, Paco, Francisco Veracel, to all the champions who are here right now, what I feel on this day is something very special, very emotional. What can I say? Everything we do is for this title. It is a pleasure to achieve this. Today is a very special day. Thank you, Puerto Rico, Lopez said.
Wasn't it just the other day that Teofimo Lopez was doubling down on his retirement claims?
It was, and it was just the other day we talked about it here on the channel. Also on hand was Oscar Calazio, the 105-pound world champion, who was also honored with a special WBO commemorative plaque for becoming the champion with fewest amounts of fights that Puerto Rico has ever had. I'm grateful to Paco for this. Congratulations to Teofimo for his achievements. You deserve it. We keep growing. We made history, and we will continue working hard to achieve all our goals. I do this for my fans. Let's go for more, Calazio said.
Big day in Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rican women are hot.
That's true.
Who knows if it's either instability, indecisiveness, or strategy that leads Teofimo Lopez to double down on retirement claims while simultaneously claiming his WBO title.
So is he retired or is he not retired?
Among the other champions in attendance, champions and prospects who were present: Samuel Serrano, Nelson Diepa, Ivan Calderon, Aureli Musinho, Tatiana Ortiz, Xander Zayas, Juan Laporte, John Molina, Angel Cholo, Espada Rafael Del Valle, Carlos Quintana, Josue Dicky Camacho, Alex El Nene Sanchez, Angel Acosta, Jonathan Gonzalez, Orlando Fernandez, Jose Caguitas de Jesus, Daniel La Cobra Jimenez, Orlandito del Valle, René Santiago, Wilfredo Vega, Yomar Alamo.
Wilfredo Rivera.
The point is, it was a packed house to celebrate not Not just Teofimo's coronation as WBO champion, but some others. And this leads to more questions than it answers. Is Teofimo really retired? Has he really vacated the WBO title?
Rick is chomping at the bit to find out.
Rick Merrigan, who handles the careers of former champion Jose Ramirez and unbeaten up-and-comer Arnold Barboza in the 140-pound division, saying, hopefully Lopez has kissed the WBO belt goodbye yesterday for good now, so we can figure out the rest of the division for the guys waiting that have actually paid their dues.
Is he implying that Teofimo hasn't?
It's a really stupid comment, really stupid oversight if he has. You can say what you want about Teofimo's business practices, but you can't question his track record, his resume. I didn't think he was going to beat Josh, and he proved me wrong.
Same Josh Taylor that beat Rick Merrigan's boy, Jose Ramirez, and I know he's not implying that Arnold Barboza has paid his dues more than Teofimo.
Is this guy on drugs? Teofimo took to his social media later on in the day saying, man, when are grown-ass men and women going to learn not to try and disrespect me and my intelligence? I'm trying to keep my humility outside of the ring. However, you imbeciles sure walk right into it. Let me stop before I end their baloney podcast and so-called expertise in boxing.
I wonder who he's got in mind.
Somebody's ruffled his feathers. Somebody's peed in his cornflakes. Is he referring to this podcast or someone else's?
There's a thin line between being a fan of boxing and a fan of a man.
Here on Ring IQ, we don't brown nose for Teofimo Lopez the way some others do, the way some others would, for access. That's the caveat of relying on access to a fighter and his team in order to produce content. You become a shill.
I'm not about to do that.
Stick to the facts and call a spade, whether the fighter and his team, Teofimo Lopez or someone else.
Whether they like it or not, because fighters come and go.
They come and go. They rise and they fall, but when they're gone, the sport still remains, and that's what I'm a fan of. The sport, more than any singular fighter, any singular individual.
Too many of these fighters got big egos. Maybe it's part of their occupation that they're supposed to have them, but
you could spit in the wind and hit a fighter with a massive fucking ego. It's unclear right now what Teofimo's next move is going to be, but the next man in line seems to be Arnold Barboza, who's managed by Rick Merrigan. So could that end up being Teofimo's next fight?
I think it'll either be between Arnold Barboza or Jose Ramirez upon Teofimo Lopez's return. He's not under any orders right now.
But at some point he's going to be, and he may be opposite the ring, one of Rick Merrigan's fighters.
He may be at liberty right now to be indecisive, claiming that he's retired while simultaneously accepting a WBO title. He might be at liberty to do that right now.
But he won't be forever. At some point the WBO is going to put him on the spot.